Today's date is January 19, 2025. We're having a Israeli Palestinian Confederation simulation in light of the fact that in the last 74 years, we haven't been able to make peace, and we are proposing a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine. Not only have we not been able to make peace in Israel and Palestine in the last 74 years, we have constant wars, and we have an intensification of this war in the last year and several months. The Israeli and the Palestinian governments are unable to give peace to their people. They are unable to give security to their people. They do not have a vision for peace for the people of Palestine and Israel. We are the Israeli Palestinian Confederation, and we are making a proposal for a common federal confederation government in Israel, Palestine. You can see our website at ipconfederation.org. You can also read the Constitution. It's in 3 languages, in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. And you can read the Constitution for the federal government in Israel, Palestine. A federal government with 3 branches: a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. The legislative branch will have 300 parliament members in 300 districts. That includes Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem and Israel. The executive branch will be Palestinian and Israeli, one president, one vice president, rotating in 2 years, and the judicial branch, a Supreme Court, and several other layers of courts that include Palestinians and Israelis as equal in the entire area of Israel, Palestine, having jurisdiction over legislation that the federal government will pass. We are not proposing policies for the federal government. We are proposing a system of government for the people of Israel and Palestine, with a federal government, with a legislative and an executive and judicial branch. And we are proposing that the federal government, based on equality, based on common parliament, will decide all the policies, including how to make peace, including how to, if necessary, create other formulas for peace, including 2-state, 1-state, if they deem it necessary. We are not proposing the dismantlement of the Palestinian or the Israeli government, but the federal government that we are proposing does not require their existence. If, and it seems like they do exist, then they will have a veto power over legislation that the federal government passes, as long as it violates their sovereignty. So the Palestinian and the Israeli government will have sovereign veto power over legislation that violates their sovereignty. But if it doesn't violate their sovereignty, they would not have a veto power. My name is Joseph Avasar. You can reach me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Unfortunately, Walid Shumali will not be able to come today. I just had a phone conversation with him half an hour ago on WhatsApp. He explained to me that he is under immense pressure. He lives in Bethlehem, and he feels that it would be best for his personal safety not to participate in the simulation. As you know, there is a prison exchange going on right now in Israel and Palestine, and the emotions are extremely high on both sides. And he feels that given the circumstances of what's going on as we speak, literally as we speak, would make it much better for him not to participate in the simulation. When we met about 2 weeks ago, the political situation was completely different than what it is right now, and I understand his concern. I assured him that I will convey his regret for not participating in the simulation, and I will send him a recording of the simulation. By the way, we have recording of all the simulations. They're on our website. You can go scroll down and see each and every recording that we have had in the past. We invite people of all political persuasion, pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, regardless of their political views, in order to stress test the federal idea that we are proposing. Also, I'd like to remind you to join the IPC meetup group. Nasir will put a link in the chat to the IPC meetup group. We would like to create chapters to the meetup groups in different parts of the world, and we are asking you to join. And if you're willing to be to participate in a chapter or to create a chapter, let us know. It's not going to cost you meetup charges for creating groups. However, you will not have to pay a single dime. You will work under our umbrella. We are the one picking up the tab, and we will show you how to create a chapter. And we would like to have chapter in as many cities around the world in order to help organically grow support for the federal government in Israel, Palestine.
Hey, Joseph. Joseph, can somebody click on that link and see if it works? I just put it in the chat box.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm not sure if it works for other people. It works for me, but
okay. You'll put it throughout the simulation, and if we will get some reaction. On January,
I just clicked on it and it does work.
Thank you.
Okay, on January 28th, this month, we will have a quarter-page ad in the Washington Post. We would like to invite people who reside in Washington, D.C., who read the Washington Post, including senators, congresspeople, people in the State Department, and people in the White House, to participate in the simulation. And hopefully it will give us some publicity, because we believe that the difference between creating a federal government and what we are right now is public awareness of the formula for peace that we are proposing. If we are able to create public awareness, then the federal government will have the funding and will have the legitimacy to go forward to create a federal government. And in my opinion, that's the only reasonable solution in Israel, Palestine. On February 2nd, we will have Ray Hanania. He is an award winner Palestinian American journalist who covered national and international politics. On February 16, we are supposed to have Professor Shaul Magid. He sent me an email that he would like to withdraw. I believe he is having second thoughts. And I see that all the time. People that are pro-Palestinians or pro-Israelis who accept our invitations, they're having second thoughts. I've seen that many, many times. And usually I try to have a discussion with them, and sometimes they change their minds, sometimes they don't. I hope that he will change his mind, but we're going to have other guests in the future. We are demonstrating how a federal government that gives a veto power to the Palestinian and the Israeli government will be able to pass legislation. We call that threading the needle. And we are demonstrating that in this simulation. I am asking you to be patient and to help us demonstrate how a federal government could be created and how it could thread the needle, meaning it would pass legislation that neither side will be able to oppose. So I am asking you, please ask questions. Questions are very constructive. There are things that are going through your mind as I speak. Don't be embarrassed to ask the questions, and put the questions on the chat. We would like to have a free flow of the simulation. So please put your questions on the chat. Nasir, who is administrating the questions, will convey those questions. Today it's particularly important to have questions because our guest was not able to come. Nasir will convey the questions, and he will also translate your comments to a question. For example, if you write, Israel will never allow that to happen, then the question he will ask is, would Israel allow this to happen, etc. So please, we want to have engagement during the simulation. It's not a lecture. And ask as many questions as possible. They're very, very helpful. We have a short video. Nasir told me to skip that part, but since we have new audience, this video explains the essence of the federal government proposal that we are making.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli Palestinian Confederation.
Are you playing something? Because we don't see it.
Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically.
Yes, I am.
No. Is it me or?
You don't see that?
No.
Okay, let me.
Does anybody else see anything?
You could see it. I was seeing it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It must be my screen.
Okay. Let me go back to it.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed, and the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So let's conduct a pre-simulation survey, which we will compare to a post-simulation survey. Please vote at this time. Do you support a common federal government for Israel, Palestine? Please vote yes or no. Do you support a common federal government? You have 5 more seconds to vote. Okay, could you please publish the vote? 23 out of 24, which is 96%, voted yes. 1 person voted no, which is 4%. And share the results. Okay. This is the definition, as we see it, of a federal confederation. Confederation and federal government exist worldwide to address specific conflicts. Some governments refer to themselves as federal governments, while others use the term confederation. Definitions are not fixed and evolve with changing realities. In the context of Israel-Palestine, the IPC defines confederation and federation as a shared government for the people of Israel and Palestine, guided by the democratic principles outlined in the IPC Constitution, which can be found at ipconfederation.org. This is the heart of the simulation. You will have to assume, as part of this simulation, that we were able to achieve major funding in order to have a 1-year-long campaign promoting the elections, promoting the benefits of a federal government, and promoting the parliament members who will be seeking to be elected, and the president and vice president. You'll have to assume that we were able to create a platform for Palestinians and Israelis to vote online, and that the election will take place online with 3 months for people in Palestine and Israel to vote. You will have to assume that 14 million people in that area, Palestine and Israel, West Bank, Gaza, are given an opportunity to vote, with the exception of children. You will have to assume that 5 million people voted, and 3 million Palestinians, out of the 5 million, 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million Israelis voted. You will have to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. For the purpose of this simulation, you'll have to assume that me, Joseph, was elected as president. I never will run as president. I do not qualify to be president constitutionally, because I am a citizen of Israel, but I am not a resident of Israel, and I do not reside in Israel, and therefore in the real world, I am not eligible to run as president. You'll also have to assume that a Palestinian lady received 1.3 million votes, and she will become president in 2 years. I will become vice president. We both have constitutional duties. You will also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected. I'm going to be asking you in the simulation to act as parliament members representing 300, one district out of 300, that your constituents consisted of 47,000 people. Please ask your questions regarding these assumptions. Do you have any questions regarding these assumptions? Nasir, do we have any questions?
1 second. We should.
I hope that the lack of question is because you are
set up like the. So there's a question here. It's kind of not about the assumptions. I don't know if you want to see this since we don't have a guest. Can we reverse the setup? The setup like the European Union, where each state is independent and the delegates of the states will build a constitution and agreement how to run the union. Maybe the question should be is, how does your version of the confederation form like different from the European Union? Maybe you want to, because I hear this question a lot sometimes people bring up.
Well, I am not a European Union expert, and I don't want to start representing what the European Union formula is. But I believe that there are separate states in Europe, and those governments created some sort of a federal system. In general, we do not propose that those governments, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, will create a federal government. Those governments are failed governments. The Palestinian and the Israeli governments are failed governments. They do not have the vision to make peace. They do not have legitimacy from the people of Israel and Palestine. We are proposing a federal government that will be independent and separate from the Israeli and the Palestinian government, that will be elected by the people of Israel and Palestine, regardless of whether the Palestinian or the Israeli governments agree to it or not. It's a competitive arena, not created by the Palestinian or the Israeli government. They would not want a competition, but we are proposing a competition.
But Joseph, if I could make couple of comments about it on the basis of the fact that.
But before Giacomo, hold on 1 second. But I think the question is that, from the way I read it, is that he's saying is it the confederation that makes the entities that fall under the confederation, or is it the entities that make the confederation? Meaning, does Palestine and Israel, is it coming from them rather than the confederation making the 2 states or the 3 states or the 3 areas ruling whatever is? I think that's what he's looking at.
Well, yes, the federal government will be independent, and if they choose, they will have the option of creating or proposing a 2 states if they so choose. They may not choose that. But
Joseph, I could make one little very simple distinction to explain the difference. The EU is an intergovernmental agreement. So it's the governments that have come together, and they created one institution, the European Parliament, which is directly elected by the people. The IPC is doing the opposite. It starts from from a parliament, which is common, and then on the basis of that parliament could eventually create whatever it decides to do, maybe some confederation with its own institutions, but it's the opposite. It's a bottom-up rather than a top-down approach.
Libby, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just thinking about the money that we need and these assumptions, and then considering everything that's going on right now on the ground, how can we compete for the money that is needed for our process when so much money is needed just simply for reconstruction and taking care of people's needs? I feel like suddenly we're up against something very challenging in terms of getting money, and then running the getting people to run for parliament and voting and all those details. How does everything that's happening on the ground now change the way we lay out these assumptions in our process? How can we compete with that?
You're asking about the reality, not the assumptions, correct?
Yes, the reality that what we're up against to make this proposal work.
Okay, we do not have money problem. We have awareness problem. There is plenty of money around the world, but it's not coming our way because nobody knows about what we are doing. We haven't received any legitimate coverage from major publications around the world. So I believe that if we are able to get awareness, then the money would be not an issue at all. There's plenty of money around the world. Once the people of the world understand that this is a good vision for peace, and we receive legitimate discussion about it and endorsement, then we will be able to obtain the funding, and it's not going to be in competition with the funding that is being wasted on the war in Israel, Palestine, and the very little money that is being spent in order to help the Palestinian and the Israeli people. I hope I answered your question. All right, any other questions? All right, so I assume that you do not have further questions because everything is clear and you are in agreement that these assumptions could be achieved. So this is the area of Israel, Palestine. I am asking you as parliament members to choose whether you are Israeli or Palestinian parliament member in this simulation. Please make your choice at this time, whether you are Palestinian parliament member or Israeli parliament member. And you need to be intellectually honest. You need to decide in your own head what area of Israel, Palestine you represent. Is your area exclusively Palestinian constituents or exclusively Israeli, or mixed, meaning Palestinians and Israelis together? So I'm giving you 5 more seconds to make your decision whether you are Palestinian parliament member or Israeli parliament member. And let's publish it. We have 13 out of 23 who are Palestinian, 57% are Palestinian parliament member, 11 out of 23 are Israeli parliament member. That's 48% of our constituents, of our audience, are parliament members. So so please remain intellectually honest as to what area you represent. I need a volunteer to act as Israeli Prime Minister. You will need to assume his personality, political personality. I'm not interested in the gossip, not interested in the personal attack. I'm interested in someone who is willing to act as Israeli Prime Minister in a political way to assume his personality? Do I have a volunteer to act as Israeli Prime Minister?
I'll do it if no one else wants it. This is Charles.
Okay, you will have to assume his personality, okay? Charles?
Got it.
Okay, I understand your personality is different, but you'll have to convert your personality into the Israeli personality, okay?
Now, hopefully the process is reversible.
That's a good one. Well, we'll find out. All right, we need a Palestinian president. Do we have a volunteer to act as Palestinian president? Nasir, are you willing to be Palestinian president?
I could do that. Yes.
Okay. All right. So you are no longer part of the parliament. You are a different government, and you are not entitled to vote on our legislation, okay? Because you are a different government, and the only thing that you will have is a veto power and the ability to persuade us to make changes to the legislation that we are proposing. The rest of you will have the ability to vote. So since we now have an election, we elected 300 parliament members. I was elected the president. The first order of business is the Constitution. This is a short version of the long version of the Constitution that is on our, this is a condensed part of the Constitution. Libby, would you be so kind as to read this Constitution?
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
All right, so our Constitution prohibits us from undermining or attempting to supplant the Palestinian and the Israeli governments. If they exist, we cannot undermine those governments. Furthermore, if we pass legislation that violates their sovereignty, we give them a veto power. So the Israeli and the Palestinian government, for example, could create two states. They could decide on the borders between those two states. They can decide on the relationship between those two states. We are prohibited from undermining those agreements. Now, you are the parliament member. You ran to be parliament members. You agreed to the Constitution. Now you need to ratify the Constitution. If you fail to ratify the Constitution, you will be excluded from the parliament, and the person who received the second number of votes in your district will be elected as parliament member, provided he or she accepts the Constitution. Palestinian parliament members, please ratify the Constitution. Palestinian parliament members. do you support the Constitution? You must accept it if you want to continue to be part of the parliament. This is in every democracy in the world. There is that has a constitution that parliament members swear allegiance to the Constitution. It's not only dictatorial on our part, it's the custom everywhere in the world, because the Constitution gives us a basis upon which to pass the legislation. It is a basis for transparency for the legislation and gives the people of Israel, Palestine protection against unreasonable, unconstitutional legislation. Publish the votes, please. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members agree to ratify the Constitution. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. It's very important to have a constitution so that the people of Israel and Palestine will understand the limit that the government has and the constraints and its responsibility to protect the people. And it also gives the Supreme Court guidance to decide whether our laws, the parliament's laws, violates the Constitution. Israel does not have a constitution, and therefore it has a constitutional crisis that cannot be resolved. Publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Thank you so much. This is a momentous occasion in the history of the Middle East. It has never occurred in the past. In the history of humanity, from the moment that we recorded history until now, we never had a common constitution for the area of Israel and Palestine. This momentous occasion undermines the existing government's use of fear and hate to justify their actions, because they are using fear and hate to justify their action. The Constitution that we just passed removes the collective stigma against Israelis and Palestinians that we are undemocratic, that we are unable to make peace, and that we were born to be enemies of each other. We passed a constitution that demonstrates that we are able to live in a democracy with separation between religion and government. It provides huge political capital to me as the president and to you as parliament members to demand assistance from the entire world, including the entire world governments and private organizations. It compels the governments and other organizations to contribute and gives the Israeli and the Palestinian new self-image, image that was created before, that we are enemies. We now have new self-image, that we are working together and that we have a constitution together. It proves to the Israeli and the Palestinians are not monolithic society. In other words, that some Palestinians and some Israelis understand that it is possible to create a federal government, and we see that aspect in the same way. We don't, all Israelis don't see the conflict in the exact same way, and not all Palestinians see it. Some Palestinians and some Israelis are willing to work together. So now we passed the legislation, the Constitution. We are passing a legislation to give a veto power to the Palestinian and the Israeli governments because they exist. We are dealing with the reality that they exist. So, Charles, would you be so kind to read this legislation? Charles? Okay, Libby, would you be so kind to read it?
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed subject to the IPC Constitution. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
All right, so this legislation defines who do we give a veto power and under what circumstances. And the question becomes, when do the governments become dispensable and when are they indispensable? So if we pass legislation regarding the use of land, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments have power to prevent us from enforcing the legislation, and therefore they are indispensable. If we pass legislation to create a common police force, removal of the wall, they are indispensable. However, if we pass legislation regarding our budget or ratifying the Constitution or appointing IPC ministers or judges, they are dispensable. We can do it regardless of whether they oppose it or not. Why do we give them a veto power? Because a veto power provides a safety net to both sides. When I say both sides, I mean the governments and the people of Palestine and Israel, because they continue to have their governments. And if they trust their governments, then they will have no reason to object to the federal government, because those governments will have a veto power to prevent the legislation that we are passing. It increases the likelihood that Israelis and Palestinians will participate because they have a safety net. It decreases the Israeli and the Palestinian government's opposition, again, because they have a safety net. It removes any claim that we are trying to be subversive or undermining the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. Not only are we not trying to do so, we are giving them a veto power. And it gives legal protection to the candidates, because those governments cannot be prosecuted for undermining the Israeli or the Palestinian government, because we are not trying to undermine. We give them a veto power. It compels the IPC. In other words, it compels our legislator to pass legislation that will be acceptable to both sides and that will be the least objectionable to the Palestinian and the Israeli governments. And it creates a platform for negotiation with the deadline. So we are basically a system of negotiations with a deadline. We are forcing discussions on major issues using the legitimacy of our government and using the ability to pass legislation on both sides. And we're basically creating a solution that with a deadline. In other words, we tell the Palestinian and the Israeli governments, hey, there is a solution. You must accept it or reject it and be upfront within a certain deadline. All right, does anyone have any questions regarding why are we giving the veto power, or what's the benefit of a veto power, or this legislation about a veto power? Does anyone have any questions? hard for me to know if there are no questions
There's
because
none.
everything is understood or because everything is so vague that it's not understood. All right.
Yeah, and the chat is quiet, so I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Then Palestinian Parliament members.
That's a hand up.
Okay. Who is Palestinian Parliament? Please vote. Who is asking the question? You can vote.
Avigdor, do you have a question? He's speaking, but we can't hear him. I don't think he's speaking to us.
You need to unmute.
He's unmuted, but I think his microphone is not working.
Okay. More Palestinian, please vote. Publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian Parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli Parliament members. Please vote. Israeli Parliament members. Please vote on this legislation to give a veto power to the Palestinian and Israeli governments over legislation we passed that violates their sovereignty. Publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli Parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Now, I would like to go back to the Washington Post ad because I forgot to mention a very important thing, which is that many of the people that are participating in this simulation today are contributing to this ad. Some of them are very, very generous in their contribution, and I want to thank you very much. Also, we need more contributions, so if you'd be kind enough to help, that would be greatly appreciated. You can go to our website and go to donor and just, even if you donate $10, I can't tell you enough how uplifting any donations makes for this cause, because people say, well, I support a federal government, but when you put $5, $10, it is a lot different than just saying I support, and it is very, very encouraging. And we do need encouragements. We need to go on. It's very, very difficult to go on with this idea when you have such skepticism from really the general audience about federal government. I had this conversation with a friend of mine who, unfortunately, we lost the relationship, and we try to start it all over again. And he said, your idea is good, I support it, but it's delusional. It's not ever going to happen. And I run into these comments day in and day out. And the answer to that, you must be kidding. What's going on for the last 74 years? What's going on in the last year? That is realistic. That's not delusional. We are proposing a federal government that would give your people peace, your son and your daughter the ability to live in peace and go to college instead of going to the military. So going back to the contribution, whenever we get $5, $10, it's very, very encouraging, and we need encouragement. Thank you.
Hey, Joseph, I put a link for the donation link. And I just, yeah, I put it in the chat, and I wanted to add to what you said as well, if you don't mind, that at this time, and as many of us are aware about the developments and the ceasefire, and this is not the moment to say that to back down. This is actually the opportunity. We have the ceasefire is really just the beginning, because we have to now deal with the reality, and forums like this can help us move forward, because as Joseph said, the current status quo is not sustainable. It has not brought us anywhere near to a solution for these people. So even when people say this is delusional or this is not going to work, etc., The fact is, in both Israeli and in our society and Palestinian society, we're very frustrated. We're very traumatized, and we're looking for a new solution. And it's either to become more rejectionist, more extreme, or to embrace something new that can lead us forward. So the preferred thing is to something that's going to get us to move forward peacefully and equally. And so that's why, so this kind of work is needed now more than ever. The window of opportunity is open, and we need to do something now before it gets too late.
Sean, did you have a question? All right.
Well, it's not really a question, but when you mention fear and hate, honestly, I've been going on the social media and I've been interacting with some people, and some people are just like last time I mentioned about the Hezbollah, those people on the internet saying all these stuff. You know what? You're mentioning fear and hate that both Israel and Palestine uses to continue this war. You're saying fear and hate, but then these guys on the internet complaining that you're making conspiracies against them and that they totally discredit you from saying all these things because you're making and then they dismissed your what they dismiss the terms you make, that when you mention about that the Israeli and Palestinians are using fear and hate, and then they just tell you that I don't agree with their narratives, but this is what they're saying, and I constantly get these terms from them, and they just keep this is my
Well,
yeah.
This is why these simulations are so important, because we go through this incrementally, step by step, and we are asking people, do you have a question? Do you have really an opposition? And when we are showing this incrementally, step by step by step, and they realize that they do not have an opposition, a rational opposition to what we are doing, they do not have, then it makes, we are making some progress. Unfortunately, the media is refusing to pick this up. And I'm hoping that our ads, that we had a New York Times ad, now we're having a Washington Post ad, people are going to say, well, what is this about? These are rational people. They are able to put an ad in the New York Times. They are showing us, the people of the federal government. Remember, in Washington, the federal government of the United States exists. They are practicing federal government day in and day out. They vote day in and day out. So they are saying, well, why not have a federal government in Israel, Palestine? It makes perfect sense, because it makes perfect sense to them. They are practicing it. So we are hoping that someone will ask the question. Someone, in the media will ask that question. And I believe that once that question will be asked in an open way, in a way that would bring more questions and more media, then everything will change. We, like I told Libby earlier, we don't have money problem. We have awareness problem.
Joseph, when you mention rational, there's protests that are protesting against the war that's going on in Gaza, but then there's those Hezbollah that are just calling these protesters bad people, or they're just they're ruining the city. They're being obstructive to the city. People can't move on with their life because they're protesting. They start attacking all the protesters, and they're peaceful protesters, going around complaining that there should be something must be done with this war. And all I'm seeing on the media is that they're being labeled as haters or terrorists, whatever, these protesters, and they're peaceful protesters in Israel or in America, but look, the media is making them look like the bad guys.
Yeah, well, look, I have many conversations with those people, and when I present this, the only response they have is the word delusional or attacking me on a personal level. And I said, well, okay, let's go beyond that. I mean, is 74 years, is the loss of thousands and thousands of Palestinians and Israeli lives, thousands. If you put them in a Super Bowl arena, they will not fit all the people that have been killed, and those injured, and those families that have been destroyed. Is that not delusional? So you know, these Hasbara people, in my opinion, are the delusional people. They are the delusional. They are continuing with this thing over and over and over again, and regardless of the consequences to their own people.
You know, when people complain about the war, like I wish these guys will be like, okay, there's war going on there. We need to do something about it. Instead, they start going attacking the messengers, the people who are complaining about them. And
Yeah.
this is completely, you know.
Okay, let's go on. Charles, do you have a comment?
As long as you were on this topic, if you want to move on, that's okay. But it's just, to me, it gets your way of presenting the IPC and saying we're neither the Israeli narrative nor are we the Palestinian narrative. I mean, that goes really deep, because what's going on, you can look around the globe. I mean, there's the Putin narrative, and there's the NATO narrative, and there's all these narratives that are basically cults. You know, they're collective myths that, as if we keep believing in them and reinforcing the myth, that will make them true. And they just end up going against human nature, which does not want to be divided. And, you know, that's what we're facing.
Yeah.
Trying to get people to wise up. They're really sunk in their various narratives. But, you know, I agree with you that there is no way forward unless people step out of that.
All right, so we passed this legislation regarding a veto, and we changed the subject mostly because of me. I plead guilty to that. Let's have the next legislation, common police force. Charles, please read it.
Common police force. Equal number of Israeli and Palestinians at each level. Distinct uniforms for the common police force different from the Israeli or Palestinian police forces. Independent of the Israeli and Palestinian security forces. In cooperation with the separate Israeli and Palestinian authorities. Address sensitive religious, cultural, and language requirements, giving each side exclusive management of the holy site, but given the common police force the right to enforce entry and exit routes to the holy sites. Facilitate the operation of the joint economic zones. Investigate corruption by administrators who refuse to teach tolerance. Investigate allegations of intolerance and racist hate crime against Israelis or Palestinians. Assist in managing checkpoints. Guard the Parliament building and threats against members of the Confederation. Facilitate access to and safety of religious facilities. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government and the Palestinian. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
So you are the Palestinian president. You will have a veto power after we pass this legislation. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation or why we are presenting this legislation to begin with? In other words, why is it necessary to have a common police force? Could we create a common police force? Who will be the person who will be responsible for the police force under the Constitution is the vice president, not the president. But it will be.
I have a question. It concerns the religious sites. you say that this legislation says that the IPC police force would ensure security at these sites. But what sites are we talking about? I mean, there are a lot of religious sites that are on Israeli territory, and I suppose the Israeli police force does its job in keeping security and safety there. So we're talking about maybe more precisely contested areas such as the Temple Mount and so on, I guess.
Yes. Well, it would be in cooperation with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. So we are speaking about mostly about religious sites in which Palestinians and Israelis use that are now exclusively under Israeli control. They have the border patrol that is supposedly in charge of security in those areas. Those are this religious site we are speaking about.
So basically, the two sides. I mean, IPC would need, of course, both the Palestinian and Israeli government to agree to allow this IPC force, to operate on these sites. So it requires cooperation and using the people's power. So the vote of the parliament will force these state authorities to accept that people want a different way of governing and of approaching these common issues in Israel and Palestine. I'm saying this to make it clear to everybody what is involved in this exercise.
Like for example, Nazareth, the Church of the Annunciation. So would the IPC Joint Common Police Force have any role there?
Is that in Jerusalem?
No, it's in Nazareth.
In Nablus?
Nazareth.
Oh, in Nazareth.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I would hope so.
Because it's a holy site for Palestinian Christians. So, for example, the argument might be is that if this police force was to come to Hebron and to be the police force of the Tomb of the Patriarch, the Ibrahimi Mosque, or Masjid al-Aqsa, Temple Mount, then the argument could be, well, why don't we apply this to Nazareth or Kufr Kanna? These are holy sites for Christians, including Palestinian Christians.
Well,
may I interject? Yes, I totally agree. But this, in practice, if the IPC were to pass this law in reality, they would have to get agreement from the Palestinian Authority to be able to deploy their force. But that would be a second stage. First, the legislation has to be passed. Afterwards, the IPC would have the authority, the moral authority and the legal authority to go to the Israelis, go to the Palestinian authorities and say, look, we are asking you to honor the decision of the people. And we want you to allow our police force to monitor these sites. And of course, sometimes there will be reasons, practical reasons why maybe an IPC deployment is not practical in certain sites. Well, but this is a question of
I could tell you,
working it out.
It's a case by case situation. It's not
exactly.
It could be applied only to, for example, like the church in Nazareth, and I would even go so far to say like Bethlehem, for example, and the church in the Holy Sepulchre are only holy to Christianity, but the Ibrahimi Mosque, which is the Tomb of the Patriarchs for Jews, and the Temple Mount, which is the Masjid al-Aqsa for the Muslims, maybe it should specify that specific to when the places are holy to more than one religion.
Look, this is what committees do, and this is what witnesses are brought. For example, you spoke about the church in Nazareth, okay? I don't have any information as to whether Christians from all over the world are feeling insecure in going to Nazareth because it is controlled by Israeli police force. Would it enhance participation or travel into Nazareth if we have common police force? Then it would seem like it's a good idea, because the city of Nazareth would want that. They want to encourage more participation, more tourism, and more travel into Nazareth. So I think it is all case by case situation. We are just demonstrating in general what a common police force could do.
But what Nasir said actually brought to my mind that there are also another level of people that need to be interrogated in this specific issue, and it is the religious communities. So it's the Hebrew authorities for the Jewish religion, Muslim religion, and Christian religion. These people can also be involved in negotiating and agreeing the deployment of a police force that can provide an additional pressure on the government, on Israeli or Palestinian governments who might want to resist this. So the IPC can trigger a movement which is broader and to bring pressure from many sides to on these governments that might want to obstruct progress.
Giacomo, I think you meant integrated, not interrogated.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this legislation. And by the way, this also would apply to Gaza and Southern Israel. 100% of published a vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. We're actually getting more Israeli parliament members, which is very encouraging. Please publish the vote. Also, 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. So this is just to show how a federal government could thread the needle, could pass legislation that would be acceptable to both sides and would enhance the interest of both sides, and neither side could hopefully, let's go back, let's see the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Oh. Yeah, probably, because my right wing would just fucking eat me up. And, you know, I'm not really interested in a solution. I'm just mostly interested in maintaining power, and for that I need the right. And you know, even amongst the wide population, they're more concerned, I think, although there's this thing about the hostages that'll probably blow over, and if I can manage to hang on to power, everybody's more concerned with increasing the size of Israeli control over territory than they are actually having any kind of peaceful relationship with the Palestinians. Doesn't seem to be a big priority. So yeah, I would probably veto it.
Well, if you do not veto it, in my opinion, you are more likely to increase your coalition, and you are more likely to have support from, you may lose support from right wing, I'm not so sure, but you are very likely to get support from the left in your Knesset. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, but that's a calculation that my entire political career argues against. I've never courted, approval from the left. I think it would be out of, if I am presenting the current prime minister and the way I think he would think, I think it would be not in keeping with my entire political career to court more approval from the left. So,
All right, Nasir, as the president of Palestine, would you veto this legislation?
I don't think I'm not going to veto it because there's already a common police. We do have joint security arrangements in Area B, and it's been successful at stopping extremism. I believe that if we didn't have this joint cooperation in these areas, and I think my Israeli counterpart can admit to this, I believe his Secret Service has even told him this several times, that when our security forces cooperate and work together, it actually reduces. It's been the greatest deterrent of violence in your society, in your cities. So people, if you look at whenever cooperation between our two security forces are strong, it protects your citizens. So the fact that you're against this tells me that you are going against what has worked in the past. So I think you should reconsider this. The only problem I have with this legislation is the mentioning of checkpoints, which I feel we need to work to remove it. But even considering that, I think that overall there's more positive to this than negative. So my Israeli counterpart needs to really rethink what he's thinking, because cooperation has worked. It has been the greatest deterrent. It's deterred more violence than any wall you've built, any army that you've sent to come into our cities and invade and attack us. So you should reconsider.
Mr. Prime Minister, as the president of the entire area, the only legitimate president in the entire area, if I work and I persuade Knesset member on the left or those that are in the center to join your coalition, if you remove your veto, would you be willing to remove your veto?
well, that is a different political calculation. Yeah, I might respond to that. But responding to what Nasir said, the thing that's most threatening to me, even from losing support on the right, is to legitimate a process that allows another political actor a foothold into the existing situation. So that is something that I probably would resist, but that resistance could be overcome by the political calculations you just raised.
All right. Okay, so I think that we demonstrated vividly how this thing will work out. We're not here to score a victory over one side. We are here to demonstrate how a federal government will have the political power and the ability to create new situations in Israel and Palestine. And I think we've seen that vividly right now in our discussion with the Prime Minister and with the President of Palestine. Let's go to the next legislation, and that is rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. We had a long legislation on that issue. This is a short version. And Libby, would you be so kind as to read it?
The IPC is the only legitimate government in Israel and Palestine, consisting of 300 parliament members elected by the entire population. Approximately 125 members represent the destroyed areas. The IPC is committed to the well-being of all people, including the 5 million individuals directly affected by the violence since October 7th. The IPC believes that the future of the Gaza and Israeli people is interconnected. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore a normal, peaceful existence in the foreseeable future. The IPC is requesting a $50 billion grant from the international community, which includes Israel and Palestine, to fund and coordinate the rebuilding of the devastated areas. The IPC will prioritize the following. 1, the IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate return of all political prisoners in Israel and Palestine to their homes. 2, rebuilding thousands of homes, roads, hospitals, civic buildings, and infrastructure to facilitate the immediate return of all people to their homes. And 3, restoring law and order and civil society that have been destroyed. The governments of Israel and Palestine are dispensable and are not granted a veto power on this legislation.
Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? And particularly, why are the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are dispensable? Well, I'll answer that question because we have the funding. If we obtain the $50 billion, which I think we would be able if the assumptions are met. If we meet the assumptions, we will have huge political power, huge political capital to demand $50 billion grant from the international community, from organizations all over the world. As the president, I will make sure to go all over the world, to major governments and international organizations all over the world. And if we have the funding, we do not need to give a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian government, because they will have no choice but to cooperate with us. So any questions on that, or shall we go to a vote? Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation.
There was a question.
What's the question? Who is
Somebody
that?
was asking who will do it. Who will do the reconstruction? Who will do all the work?
We do. We are the parliament. We will do it in cooperation with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. If they refuse to cooperate, then they will not receive the funding from us. But we are the federal government, and we will do it.
May I interject one thing? That sounds good, but in practice, how would, okay, the IPC has the funding. How do they ensure a contract to rebuild a certain building in Gaza? They need approval by some local authorities, Palestinian authorities, hopefully, to get the building permits and get everything in right. So it's that we still, IPC still needs some degree of cooperation from these governmental entities, both Israeli and Palestinian.
Yes, we do need cooperation, but we do not need to give them a veto power. They will cooperate with us because we have the funding. If they refuse to cooperate, they're not going to get the funding. We have the power of the purse, and we are going to be using that power regardless of whether they have a veto power. If they refuse, they don't have the funding, neither the Palestinian nor the Israeli, and they want us to provide the funding, but we want to give it with strings attached. Okay, publish the Palestinian parliament members, all the Palestinian parliament members voted yes on this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Do you support this legislation? Israeli parliament members. Five more seconds to vote. Please publish the vote. 92% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Congratulations. let's hear from the President of Palestine and the Israeli Prime Minister. Are you going to prevent us from rebuilding Israel and Southern Israel and Gaza? Mr. Prime Minister of Israel, are you going to be preventing us?
Well, obviously, you're going to have to cooperate with me because I maintain military control over the area at the present time. So, yeah, I'd be happy to take your money or to take over the buildings that you create, and I will worry about, what happens actually later after you've rebuilt everything. I can always destroy it again if I can't control it. So,
Okay, so you're not going to prevent
no,
us?
no, I
Okay.
would not.
Mr. President of Palestine, are you going to prevent us from rebuilding Gaza?
No, absolutely not. We welcome the international community's support to rebuild and to rebuild our Gaza Strip, to help our people get on with their lives after the destruction that was caused by this genocidal war against our people. We just hope that this will not be something that has been sort of a cyclical thing, that it keeps happening every few years. And we feel that we have to ensure that we don't have to always depend on international aid to rebuild, that we have to stop causing the problem of why we need international aid to rebuild. But it's a good bill. It's good support. We welcome it, but we also need to work so that we don't have to do this again.
Okay, yes, we totally agree. So this is, I'm going back to the assumptions. If these assumptions are met, and it is possible to meet those assumptions, to obtain major funding for a year-long campaign promoting the elections, and to have parliament members elected, as we have seen, most Palestinians and Israeli parliament members will be in agreement with legislation that benefits the people of Israel and Palestine. If we are able to provide a platform for the 14 million people in Palestine and in Israel to vote, if we are able to have the election, and if we are able to advertise and give publicity, then we can have the legislation that was passed a reality. The assumptions could be converted to a reality. And we have seen this vividly in this simulations. What I'm trying to say is this simulation could be converted very easily to a reality if we create a federal government common to the Palestinian and the Israeli people. Let's have a post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Do you support a common federal government? Please vote. Five more seconds to vote. Publish the vote. All of the people who voted, without an exception, agreed that a common federal government in Israel Palestine makes sense and could make peace. So I think that this speaks volume for the benefit of a federal government and for the ability to be created and to make peace. And the people of Israel and Palestine do deserve peace. We cannot live in this horrific violence that has been going on in the last year and 3 months and in the last 74 years ever since the creation of the State of Israel. All right, I am making my closing remark. A common democratic government, confederation government, can bring peace, as we have seen in this simulation. It is realistic what we have seen. We can convert this into reality. We can create online election. The horrific spending that is going on, the horrific violence that is going on, costs billions and billions of dollars, and has been for years. Relatively speaking, we are speaking about a very small amount of money to create a federal government that will have legitimacy from the people of Israel and Palestine in the entire area of Israel and Palestine. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to ask Nasir to take over the discussion while I take a short break. Nasir?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. So at this time, we're going to have general questions and comments. If you can raise your hand and we can call on you. We have we have more time than usual. So, but we want to be, sharp with the questions. Does anybody want to start? And this could be about things in general, not just the legislation as well. So this is our open period where we can talk about things, including, current events and things like that. Kerala, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to know because it was when we were voting or when we said, okay, the money goes to rebuild Gaza.
Yeah.
And it was that Europe, for example, was giving a lot of money to rebuild Gaza from 2014 till now. And who would control and who will be the autonomic because since now it is Hamas, and they will get also, because somebody was asking who will really rebuild it, and who is going to rebuild it when the Hamas has the money in the hands?
Yeah, first of all, the bill was not just money for Gaza, it was also for the Israeli communities as well.
Yeah, sure.
And it also was that the money would be managed by the IPC. Because even the money that was given in the past to rebuild Gaza was not like cash handed to Hamas. To be honest with you, Hamas has actually left the lot of constructions and aid support left to international organizations. The NGOs control a lot of what was going on. So there is actual entities that do things in the Gaza Strip and spend money on things like development, food, and aid that are not government associated. So there are international organizations that already do this, separate from the government.
Yeah, sure. It was the NGOs and also the UNRWA. They did a lot, but the tunnels, for example, who built it?
Well, because again, they have sources of money from other places. The Qataris, the Iranians, they have a taxing system that they collect money from smuggling. So
And
I mean,
this
this specific legislation, as it was proposed, is not giving the countries, it's not giving the government of Israel, not giving the government of whoever's ruling the Gaza Strip a blank check and telling them to do this. They're taking control and managing it.
Control of our, really control. But this is also like you started with like Naseret. You said, okay, there are churches, or let's say the Temple Mount. Then it's already because the police had to, the whole thing goes and falls with control. Because under control, there can be a illegal thing going on, which was going on 10 years or more. An illegal thing went in Gaza. It was all illegal.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
See, if there is a lot of police or military even, which controls the terrorism, for example, from both sides, how you can control it? You have to control it with soldiers or with policemen. And do you think how can it be when people have arms, when they have pistols, or how can you control things which are holy for, let's say, for Christian, for Muslims, and how can you control that there will be not somebody who will rape the money or how can you control it? You have to have many people to control.
The-
How will you do that?
Well, you don't control it by mechanical means. You control the reason for the violence, the extremism to be created to begin with. If there is no reason for violence, if there is the extremists on both sides will have no legitimacy because the public will feel that there is no need for violence. There is no need for extremism. In other words, a peaceful society does not produce terrorists.
Exactly.
So you control the underlying reason for terrorism. You control the underlying reason for extremism. You make them irrelevant.
All right, I'm gonna take a question from the chat, and then I'm gonna go to Annette and then Giacomo. The question in the chat from Avigdor is that what about education? I don't. If I can answer, Joseph, I don't think the IPC is going to overrun the education systems of either Palestinian or Israeli societies. But what has been legislation that has been proposed in the past was joint efforts to teach the narration and language,
tolerance and understanding.
And understanding. So these are things that can go, but they will not replace the Israeli or the Palestinian education system. That's not meant to take it over, but maybe to enhance it to sort of include that in the curriculums. Annette, did you have a question, Miss Annette?
Yes, I'm new to this conversation, so I don't have background that
No
would
problem.
enlighten
Well,
me further. And I'm trying to understand if there's a separate Israeli and Palestinian government when we have a very mixed up geography where we have West Bank and Gaza and different pieces in different parts of the land. So if you're a Palestinian living in Israel, are you part of the Palestinian government? And if you're in Israel, I don't understand quite how this is working.
All right, let me explain to you. If you're an Israeli citizen, regardless of your nationality or religion, your government is the Israeli government. If you're a Palestinian citizen, regardless of nationality or religion, your government is the Palestinian government. So if you are what they call Arab Israeli who lives in Israel, your government is the Israeli government. If you are Palestinian living in, everything remains the same. Your government remains the same regardless of where you live or your national identity. Whatever you are right now, your government remains the same. The
So
federal
if you're a settler living in the West Bank, your government would be the Israeli government.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. If you, however, the federal government will be the government for the entire area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. So
if you want to expand, if you're an Israeli living in the West Bank, or if you want to expand and bring in more settlers, how would the government deal with that?
how is the federal government deal with that?
Yes.
That's a good question. The federal government will have to pass legislation if it feels that it's needed to curtail the number of settlers. If it feels so, then it will have to pass legislation by 55% of the Palestinian parliament members and 55% of the Israeli parliament members. And that legislation will be submitted to the Israeli and the Palestinian government and give them a veto power. Now, it may not pass. There may not be a common legislation on that issue. They may not, they may see this issue in a completely different perspective.
Yeah, so if Palestinians want to come back to their home that they were chased out of, then
Yeah, we actually have
government.
legislation. Yes, so we passed legislation and many times in our simulations for partial right of return with compensation and full right of return with compensation. And some of these legislations have passed, but remember, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments have never been able to deal with those issues, Annette. So you are saying, well, you're pointing out the imperfection of this federal government, okay? And we totally agree. It's not going to be able to pass each and every legislation on each and every issue.
Okay.
And it's not going to have the perspective of the Palestinian people or the Israeli people. It will have its own perspective.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Giacomo. I noticed I noticed Lawrence Wilkerson is here. And I wanted to raise my hand because I wanted to ask his question because his expertise is something that's very valuable. But go ahead, Giacomo. Lawrence, stick around, please.
Okay, yes. So I just wanted to make a comment about another aspect where the IPC can be very relevant, and it is that it can become a reliable interface with the international community. There are international partners who might be skeptical about investing in an area like Gaza, where so many times buildings built schools built by the EU or by some country are destroyed, and then they have to be rebuilt, and it's a lot of money that's wasted. And so the IPC can play a role in providing reassurance, providing credibility, and attracting private investment in war-ravaged areas. And that's a very important role. So the IPC is not only a common government for the region, it is also something that provides more credibility and more stability, because for a foreign investor, they see that here we have both Israelis and Palestinians who are working together in one common project. So I think that's very important, and one aspect that really needs to be stressed about why the IPC is such a good idea.
Nasir, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do.
What's your question?
So my question is in regards with the IPC and international support, mainly the United States. And I wanted to get Lawrence, if he could give us an insight on this, because recently in this, the credit for the ceasefire right now is being given to the pressure that's been applied by the incoming Trump administration. And it's also sort of shed a light that this ceasefire could have happened a year ago had Biden had the will to do it, had Biden had the will to sort of, force the Israelis to come to the table and to force them to take the deal. So my question is that does the IPC, would it be smart for the IPC if they wanted to really push this agenda to seek an alliance in the international, in the West, basically, mainly the United States? And was what happened with this ceasefire agreement an indication that the United States can, if it wants to, enforce Israel to basically cooperate with surrounding neighbors and including the Palestinians?
The first thing
I don't understand your question. Are you asking is the current ceasefire agreement proof of the United States' ability to force Israel to agree to a ceasefire?
Yes.
Okay.
And therefore, that might be a strategy for us who support a sort of confederation type of model for the solution, that that might be something we also need to focus on, since going to Israel directly is sometimes futile because without pressure, I don't see Israel accommodating to any type of solution. But that
Okay,
question maybe
Lawrence, before I let you answer, I just want to tell the audience that Lawrence Wilkerson is or was the chief of staff for the Colin Powell, who was the U.S. Secretary of State under the Bush administration. So go ahead, Lawrence.
Let me come at this in a rather circuitous way, but I think you'll see what I'm talking about when I finish shortly. First of all, yes, in May, Biden, by his own admission, gave Netanyahu the plan that is now being implemented. The reason I think that, and this is a pretty hard thought on my part, it wasn't is because Biden didn't want it to be, nor did his Secretary of State, even more forcefully, Tony Blinken. They wanted Netanyahu to have his head for an extended period of time, which turned out to be, in some respects, disastrous for Israel. That's another story. The IDF is really in trouble right now, for example. But coming at it from another direction, Joseph's direction, the reason we don't have any visibility, the reason no one picks up on us, the reason no one takes what is otherwise a highly logical and rational approach to the problems in the Levant that Israel is at the center of, and the Palestinian Arabs with them, is because no one wants to do it. It might work. This is a very, very difficult situation to understand unless you understand that Washington and London and certain other capitals in the world, and increasingly I'm beginning to think Ankara, want this chaos and confusion in the region until they've all sorted out their various and sundry problems, the leading one of which for us is Iran. So this isn't going to stop, and we're not going to get visibility because we might indeed be effective. That's the reason. Now, why did we just do TikTok the way we did? We did it because on TikTok was a volume of opposition to the genocide in Gaza that we couldn't stand, and Bibi thought was destroying his otherwise exquisite propaganda machine. That's why we banned TikTok, not because the Chinese were gaining any meaningful intelligence on us. And it's going to be interesting to see what President Trump does because he's threatening to use his presidential power to bring it right back. Let's watch and see what happens then, because the Congress wanted to do this essentially in the majority because it was destroying the propaganda they and Bibi were putting out that was convincing Americans, they thought, that Gaza was not a genocide. So that's what you're up against. You're too effective in principle, and no one wants that.
Larry, who do you think is the force that created the ceasefire? Is it Biden or Trump?
I think it was a combination of the two, and they probably agreed through Sullivan and the congressman, I forget his name now, that's going to be Biden's national security advisor, because they were talking all along. I think they brought the hammer down because Trump said, do it. And Biden was feeling, if you watch those press conferences, Biden was finally feeling some conscience.
Let me see. How could we get awareness of the IPC?
I don't know any other way than the way you're doing it right now, and do it full court press and just keep hammering away until someone recognizes it of note and puts it on the front page, so to speak, and gives you more traction.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Charles. Charles, and then Sean. You need to unmute.
I want to plug a book here. You're going to have to read it backwards, but this is Beyond the
Promised Land.
Beyond the Promised Land by David F. Noble, who is a professor in Toronto, died back in like 2011. But he makes some very interesting observations. Basically that we are mired in, and when I say we, I mean all the Abrahamic faiths in the Western world are mired in a removal from reality, in the sense that we have a separation from being in the present, because we are looking towards the idea of progress and the idea of heaven and the idea of being approved of, and that there is some, promised land or promissory transcendence in the future. And this is affecting all our politics. It's affecting how we relate to each other. And it's a very, when he goes through it, and he goes through how Western philosophy, technology, and science are also based on this same kind of premise, which is an unreality, if you will. I mean, I'm not doing it justice, obviously, and trying to describe it, but I would definitely recommend that you check out his work.
All right, thank you. Sean, what's your comment or question?
Just one question. It's a question about the guest,
Can you do a little better on the sound? Either your microphone or you're a little mute.
I'm trying, but it's
okay. Maybe get closer. Go ahead.
Just about your guest. Those guys, those two political scientists. I'm sure Lawrence knows them. And Stephen Walt and Dr. John Mearsheimer. Those two guys who made the novel the Israeli Lobby, and they talked about the Israeli lobby.
Are you speaking about Mearsheimer?
Yeah, Mearsheimer, that guy, and
yeah,
partner. Are you considering inviting him over? And because I read his, he talks about a lot about Israel. I thought maybe he would be.
All right. I invited him many times. I also interviewed him. He is part of the in my movie Surviving Peace. I interviewed him in Chicago. But let me tell you something. In my opinion, there are people, just like Lawrence said, who speak about peace. I don't know if Lawrence said that. I am saying that. People on both sides, Palestinians and Israelis and American, who pay tribute to the word peace, who claim that they want peace, who actually in reality want this conflict to go on forever on both Palestinian and Israeli side. And the reason that I know that is because if they truly wanted peace, they would examine every possible aspect for making peace. They are refusing to look at our formula for peace because they're afraid of it. They're afraid that they will have to, if we show them incrementally what this is about, they would either sound illogical or they will have to agree with it. And this is why they are refusing to come on. I can't tell you how many emails I've sent, how many actual letters and phone calls I have made to dozens and dozens of people for the last years, and they are not responding at all. In my opinion, they're just afraid of peace, and they're afraid of their own people because they are locked into this idea that one side has to be destroyed or they have to have a victory. That's what they are locked into, and they are not capable of actually seeing or not willing to see any other formula for peace.
I'm surprised Norman Finkelstein didn't want to come to our meeting, because I really read his book and I was really inspired by the books he made.
Who?
Norman Finkelstein,
Yeah, he came to, years and years ago, we had a symposium in Beverly Hills, and he came, he was invited, he came. At that time, he was not really aware of what we are proposing. It was basically anti-Israel, pro-Israel demonstration. The question of IPC did not even come up, even though we tried again and again and again. The audience, we organized the meeting. We organized the meeting, and the audience threw us off the stage because they refused to speak about it. They wanted to speak either, and I think Charles was a photographer there, in fact. And I remember my son said, he went on and he said, can we go back and talk about the IPC? Because he felt sorry for me for not being able to control the crowd. And no, they refused to do so. They are consumed with accusing each other, and they are consumed with victory rather than being consumed with actually making peace.
All right.
The other aspect of it, I think, is that for them, peace is not profitable.
Yeah, yeah, especially
There's
the weapon industry.
Yeah, there's a documentary on Prime right now. It's about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the period where he grew more and more anti-Hitler and the actions that he took and so forth. And while it's not directly relatable to our present circumstances, the bigger picture is. And what Bonhoeffer has to do finally with his Christianity and with his belief in the Sermon on the Mount as being the real epitome of Christ is become a spy and to work with the Abwehr in order, violating every principle that he believes in with regard to Christianity, but he realizes that the evil surrounding him is even bigger. And that God is absent in that evil, apparently, and so he begins to work hard to stop it. That's kind of where we are in that circumstance today. We're surrounded by evil and not peace.
What's his name?
Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who stood up to Hitler.
How do you spell his last name?
I think it's Bonhoeffer. And Dietrich is Dietrich.
And that's a documentary on where?
It's on, I caught it last night on Amazon Prime. I watched the whole thing through because it's a lot of actual films of Hitler and Goebbels and Himmler, and you really get the sense of what was happening in Germany from 33 to 38.
What's the name of the documentary?
I think it's just Bonhoeffer.
I see.
There's also a film that was made a few years ago about the same Bonhoeffer.
That could be the
same one.
Yeah, it could be. They might have just resurrected it. Yeah.
So could you explain to me what's the message? What's his message?
Well, he was trying to revolutionize German religion, if you will. He didn't like Martin Luther. Luther was not really anti-Semitic, but he did think the Jews were not good for Germany. That's a strange thing to say, but Luther was very principled in the way he took opposition to Jews in Germany. It was more religious than anything else. The two religions contrasted so dramatically in his mind. Well, Bonhoeffer came along and said the true Christ is the Christ of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed is the peacekeeper or the peacemaker. They shall, an incredibly different interpretation of Jesus, even within the Catholic Church and in the Lutheran Church in Germany. So he became a disciple who went around gathering people to him. And then Hitler came on the scene. In 33, he was elected, of course, and he had to figure out what to do. He came to America a couple of times to try and get away from it, like a lot of people did who understood what was happening, but he couldn't stay. He had to go back. He did it twice. He had to go back because he realized he was abandoning his homeland. And he fought him tooth and nail. And finally, if you know anything about the war period, the Abwehr, the super intelligence mechanism for Hitler, was really not very favorable towards Hitler. Admiral Canaris was one of his biggest enemies, the head of the Abwehr. And so he got with the Abwehr and became a double agent, violating everything he believed about his philosophy with regard to Christ and the Sermon on the Mount and such. But he felt like he had to because the evil around him was so deep and so profound.
I see. Well, I'll look into it. Giacomo?
My comment was concerning what we were talking about before, and why are so many people showing skepticism or ignoring the IPC concept? And when they get together, you get these very strong opinions from Israelis, Palestinians, or other people. And I think I worked with the EU for many years, and I noticed the same thing happening at the EU level, that people who are aware of the EU, and then there are people instead who completely ignore these things in the European capital. So you have a minister in a government that passes some legislation on something and has a complete lack of understanding that they are inside a European Union, and therefore that legislation is incompatible or makes no sense. They are so totally out of it. And my feeling is, when I hear some of the guests that we've had, they are out of it. They do not, it doesn't click in their mind. They understand the words IPC. You explain to them, they say they understand. They do not, their brains do not compute this concept. And this is the difficulty, is getting the awareness necessary that you embed the notion of a confederation in the zeitgeist, if you want, in the collective consciousness. That is the way of getting the message through to people who otherwise will be oblivious. And there's no person who's more deaf than those who don't want to hear.
Yeah. I can tell you that when I speak with Israelis, and when they logically understand the proposal of the IPC, they're more often than not, they say, well, that means the end of Israel as a Jewish state. And I question and I say, do you mean that peace is contrary to Israel as a Jewish state? And many times I get the answer, yes. So then the next question is, basically, the identity of the Jews in Israel is based on constant violence and constant war, because peace is a threat to the Israelis, to the Jews in Israel, because they feel that it would melt away the identity. And I say, well, this is more dangerous. This idea that your identity is interconnected to a war. And I agree, it is interconnected, but that in itself is very, very dangerous, because you cannot rely on the existence of a Jewish state permanently winning each and every war from now until eternity. We have to create an identity of a Jewish state based on peace, based on acceptance of the Palestinians as equal, because otherwise you are sure to destroy Israel as a Jewish state far more likely than having peace with the Palestinians. Mike?
Hello, yes. I really second what you've just been saying, because to me, if you could perhaps advertise your organization as a peace building or confidence building effort, rather than perhaps some other way of looking at it, because people might be more open to seeing, I believe Libby and her husband who's deceased was working on that for years. We actually live fairly close to her. And I think that is a good way of approaching it rather than trying to say, well, we'd like to replace the governments or counterbalance the governments. Perhaps approaching it as we are a confidence building effort. We're not terribly optimistic that we're going to rule Israel and Palestine, but the fact remains the confidence building is probably more important than the actual result at this point, you know, because if you're concerned about Jews, the safest place for Jews is to be as far away from Israel as possible. I mean, at this present state, I mean, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. All right. I see no
Can
other.
you put me on the list? Can you put me on the list of speakers, please,
Yeah,
Joseph?
you are on the list. You are first on the list, and please speak. I was
But
wondering who
we
you
have
are.
Mike. We have Mike had his
Well,
hand.
Mike already
well,
spoke.
tell me.
Oh, I'm
Well,
sorry.
do you want me to speak or not?
Go ahead.
Can you
Go
hear me?
ahead. I'm sorry, Olivia. Go ahead.
Please. I didn't see you for a long time, Olivia.
Oh, I've been here hiding in the background. I missed just one session, Joseph, but here I am. I'd like to greet Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson. I listened to him very carefully and have been doing so, and I identify with him 100% in what he's been saying recently. Recently, his rage exploded. His rage towards Western governments, especially his own and other Western governments, for supporting, financing and prolonging a genocide. Well, I go along with that. I'm a product of the West. Actually, I was born in New York. I'm a US citizen. I may not sound like it, but I grew up in the UK and other Western countries. And Colonel Wilkinson, I hope he's still around because I'd really like, I wish to thank him a great deal for what he says. He points to who the winners are, the MIC. And, you know, well, we're not going to sort of deviate from Palestine, but when he says these are proxy wars, Ukraine and Gaza are proxy wars, and the profits are going to the MIC. And the US, whether he said that or not, I'm sure he thinks it is, the US is an arms-based industry, really, and the arms industry spread across the US. So the governors of all those states try to protect jobs for their citizens. Now, let's get away from that a little bit, because I know you're interested in Palestine, and so am I. Right. I also listen very carefully to what Sean says and to what Giacomo Valentini says. Giacomo is the expert on the European Union. Now, when Sean says, oh, the IPC is a hard sell, I think one of the reasons may be because it would introduce sweeping, radical changes in people's lives in every sphere of their lives, especially Israelis. And people are a little bit suspicious and feel, you know, would sort of shy away from that, if you will. Now, changes come gradually. I would like a system where changes were step by step. People have mentioned the Irish thing, which wasn't a religious war. It was Irish nationalists. You call them, people tend to call them Catholics. They happen to be Catholics, wanting civil rights. And it's not a question of conflict solution. It's a question of conflict management. They agreed in the Northern Ireland Good Friday Agreement, I think it was 1998 or 97, 98, I think, just to stop shooting one another, talk. But they did things step by step and started the step-by-step procedure 20 years beforehand, 50 or 20 years beforehand. So, you know, changes come slowly in people's lives. Now, you could start, I think the best start would be what Libby expresses very often, and I absolutely agree with her, teaching tolerance, you know, exchange programs between the two communities. And you live with a Palestinian family. And then, you know, the Jewish people live with a Palestinian family, go to Palestinian school, vice versa. The Palestinian children live in with a Jewish family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you read what Ruth Pellet, I can't remember her married name, name by marriage, Michael Pellet's sister, who lost a child in tragic circumstances, and said, oh, it was the fault of the occupation. Now, she studied Israeli occupation as an academic, as an intellectual, and what she writes and what she says is very important. She sees that it does produce intolerance towards minorities, Palestinians included, of course. So it's worthwhile listening to people like that, worthwhile looking at the hand-in-hand education system in Jerusalem. But now is a very difficult time, Sean would agree, to sell something like the enthusiasm of the IPC because of the war. Well, of course, because of the genocide. Let's stop calling it a war, it's a genocide. Now, the shame that Colonel Wilkinson feels, I share that shame because I'm a product of the West. Western governments at the moment don't have any statesmen or women that you could call statesmen. They have the most despicable, low-level creeps, idiots, or as Colonel Wilkinson was saying, evil people. Yes. I go ahead, I go along with them, and I feel deep shame as a product of the West. And the rest of the world, we're just a little spot, by the way. Just look at the globe. We're just a sort of little spot. The rest of the world is pointing a finger at us and saying, who the hell do you think you are? You're talking about rights and blah, blah, blah. You've been committing genocide. A girlfriend of mine, I live in Italy, a girlfriend of mine said, I understand what she was trying to say, about a month ago. She said, Olivia, I know you sort of support Palestinians, etc., etc. Well, do you think Trump will be worse? Do you think Trump will be worse? And I said, Rita, what's worse than a genocide? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Olivia. You said a lot and very important things.
Well, I hope Colonel is there. I do listen to him a lot.
Yeah.
And he's wonderful. Keep at it, Mr. Wilkinson. Keep going and shout louder and raise your voice and talk as often as you can and use as strong language as you can. Okay, and Sean and Jacob and everybody, Libby, I all listen very carefully to what you all say.
Well, let's go to Heather Nicholson. Heather?
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, but we don't see you, but it's your turn.
I know. I'll be visible one of these days. Okay, I hope I'm not going to go into left field, but Yosef, what you pointed out earlier really jogged my mind on a pattern that I see and might help show that part of the problem might not actually be in the solutions. I just want to share a couple of examples. One is I recently learned from kind of an insider expert. Some of you may know there's orcas in captivity, and there's orca sanctuaries been in the works for years and years, and yet no orcas end up in those sanctuaries. And what I heard is that they'll do everything to build the sanctuary, but when it comes to actually getting one there, they stop short because that presents a whole new level of responsibility and reality that they simply don't want to go there. So this is a deception. Secondly, I work on the Snake River dams in Washington State for federal dams that need to be breached 20 years ago or never built, and they're sending the world's largest salmon populations to extinction and southern resident orcas who are critically endangered. There's a fix for that too, and the advocates simply won't go there. It's a glaring example. Third one I heard of recently, someone who is an engineer and worked in Eastern Washington presented a fix, an cost-effective fix to deal with the leaking nuclear waste from Hanford nuclear facility. And he was simply told, no, just no, we're not interested. So, there's thousands of examples like that out there in the world. And so I'm just sort of reminded that when we come up with solutions and they are shunned, there's another level to understand in why that's happening. And I don't know if anybody's got thoughts on what a practical way is to think about that and maybe approach it.
Do they do simulations to demonstrate the solution?
For all of these issues that I mentioned?
Any of them?
Sure, there's mountains of evidence. It's called studied to death. it's hardly really the only counter arguments on all of these things, although I don't know as much about the Hanford stuff, is the well-funded opposition, status quo trade groups that just have no end to propaganda machines, and that essentially swamps the science. And that's what it comes down to.
Heather, this is not about the IPC except indirectly, but there's a book called Crisis of Conscience. Every American should read it because it tells you in no uncertain terms that Hanford is our Chernobyl getting ready to happen. And the confluence of the Department of Energy, the Department of Justice, Bechtel, the chief engineer out there, and nuclear physicists who want to be whistleblowers and who are being hounded to death so they won't be, is eventually going to erupt, and we are going to have a real nuclear disaster in America.
Wow.
I'm going to talk to Columbia Riverkeeper about that and see if they know, because they do follow that. That's well, when you look at the GAO's assessment of United States environmental liability, the Hanford mess is the lion's share of all of those billions. And
if you went out there as an average American and you looked at those 55-gallon drums stretching as far as you can see, almost all of which are leaking, full of nuclear waste, you'd understand the dimensions of the problem. But the confluence of the Department of Energy, Department of Justice, Bechtel, and other people in the Congress who are hiding this and making money off of it, incidentally. And let me tell you about a conversation I overheard. This is in the halls of the Senate Hart Office building. The conversation went like this, and these are senators talking to one another. All the money that Biden gave to Israel, $17.9 billion, and really about double that, but that's what's public. This last tranche of about $7.98 billion. These senators were saying to one another, why is everybody objecting to anything like that? Because it's all going to come back to us. They were right. It's all going to come back to Lockheed Martin, Grumman, Raytheon, under Lockheed Martin now. So
Yes.
That's the way it works.
Yes.
Yeah.
crisis of
Right,
conscience.
everyone. Need to close. Thank you so much. I truly, honestly appreciate you coming on a regular basis. We need you to participate. We need you to give us a voice, and hopefully we'll have a greater voice in the future. Someone is going to pick up what we're doing, and someone is going to give us the what we want, which is notoriety of this federal government ability to make peace. So because the people in Israel and Palestine are suffering. They're suffering. Palestinians are suffering a lot more, but the Israelis are also suffering. All right, so we'll see you next time in the next simulation. Thank you, everyone.
You take care, Joseph. Take care of yourself. Okay?
All right, thank you.